Using every vile, treacherous stratagem, it compelled the Bordeaux government to ask for an armistice. This has left Britain alone at bay.
But that's not the entire truth, for Commonwealth soldiers, sailors and airmen, and men and women from nations already overrun by Hitler's Germany, found their way to Britain to carry on the fight.
We have to remember that in the so-called Battle of Britain, a fifth of all the Royal Air Force's fighter pilots were not in fact British. 87 of them were Czechoslovak. And the British, I think, were enormously appreciative of the fact that at a time of great need, we had these men who were professional and determined and courageous and were prepared to join with British squadrons in fighting the enemy.
One of them was this man, Karel Kuttelwasher from Czechoslovakia, Kut for short, who was to become an expert in a new form of air combat, and to marry Ruby Thomas during the 6 years that he spent in the country for which he risked his life, night after night. The new skill was night fighting of a very special kind. Kut was stationed in 1942 at Tangmere near Chichester in West Sussex, a member of the RAF's No. 1 Squadron.
I think I'd describe him as a loner rather than a leader. All his most successful operations were when he was on his own, not flying with colleagues as a squadron. Although he became a flight lieutenant, which meant he was responsible for half the squadron, 6 people, I think that was more a reflection of his skill and bravery than natural leadership qualities. I don't think he was a naturally gregarious person. He was very focused, very meticulous, a great disciplinarian. He would probably have irritated some people by being so focused on detail, but I think that's one of the reasons why he was such a good pilot. So I don't know that you would find him the life and soul of the party. I don't know that you would immediately warm to him, but I think you couldn't fail to respect his dedication and his professionalism.
Kut's task in No. 1 Squadron was twofold: to protect the skies above Portsmouth and Southampton from the incessant German raids, and to try to catch the German raiders when they least expected it, over their home airfields deep in occupied France as they landed or took off.
He'd flown before the war with the Czechoslovak Air Force. He'd fought with the French Air Force in the Battle of France, so he was a professional fighter pilot. His particular type of operation, though, was a very special one. It was night intrusion, where he flew on his own. He wasn't part of a squadron. He was virtually in the dark because they flew 1 week either side of the full moon. They weren't actually waiting for enemy aircraft to come across them. They were actually going to the enemy's own airfields in northwest France and the Low Countries. And so they were deliberately putting themselves in harm's way. So the skills were the generic skills of any fighter pilot, being able to fly a Hurricane very well, but some very specific skills to be able to fly at night, to be able to fly alone, to be able to see an advantage which would last seconds and seize that advantage, get in, fire your cannon and get the hell out of it. This was combat up close and personal. The Hurricane had to be within about 150, 200 yards of the bomber. You were firing cannon. The intention was to blow up the enemy aircraft. Those bombers were crewed by 7 or 8 people. He knew he was killing them. But the alternative was to let them rain bombs on British cities and for innocent British civilians to be killed.
Though he spoke little English, this is Kut's own voice describing his job as a night intruder.
I am what they call in England an intruder. I wait over the enemy drone, then I see one in my sight. I square. He falls, if I am lucky. I see him going down. Generally he's burning. Twice I have caught him when he was starting. All his bomb blow up, but I have peeled away and the blast does not catch me.
One thing we have to remember is that we were dependent on the bravery and skill of some very young men. The average RAF fighter pilot was about 19. Kuttelwasher was 24. Now, to us today, the difference between 19 and 24 doesn't seem very considerable. But at that time, when it meant an extra 2 or 3 years of fighting the enemy, of learning a professional skill, it seemed to make all the difference. So he was seen as an older person, and his nickname was actually Old Kut. I think he was seen as a kind of avuncular figure, which amused him, but he understood.
Kut's letters to Ruby indicate both the stress of his daily life and the scale of his priorities. They planned a long weekend together in 1941. Now, he wrote in August,
I can get only 2 days now. Everybody is very busy. Every day, twice, even 3 times up and over France. Once again, death took place in our squadron. One Czech, our flight commander, was killed during night. Next Monday will be his funeral.
Ruby was born and brought up in South Wales, but when her parents divorced, her mother moved the family to northwest London, to Ruislip. Kuttelwasher at this time was stationed in the London area, and they met at a dance, as so many people did in the Second World War.
Was he the marrying kind?
I don't think he had the slightest intention of getting married. I think he just wanted to have a good time in between difficult operations. I'm not sure that she particularly was looking for marriage, but she spoke some French. She'd been on holiday in Denmark. I think she was more open to meeting foreigners than perhaps some British women. He didn't speak terribly good English at that time, but she was willing to put up with that. But I think they were very drawn to each other. We have to remember that in wartime, relationships can be very intense. And I was struck by the fact that when I read the correspondence between them, the very first letter was written late the same night of the evening they first met.
I am very glad to find you. To be alone here in your country, it is sometimes sad. The happiness now, Karel has his own girl. I don't doubt we shall be happy because I found you as one very nice girl. My dearest Ruby, I am happy. If I should have you here at present, I should kiss you so much all the time. Your eyes, your hair.
When you said goodbye to a fighter pilot, you had no idea whether you'd get a telegram within a day or two saying that he'd been shot down over enemy territory, maybe killed, maybe captured. I think Ruby was in many ways the kind of mirror image of Karel. She was a vivacious woman, very open, very joyful, loved fun. And I think the sort of serious Kuttelwasher and the joyful Thomas came together. I think in many ways what attracted them to each other was how different in some ways they were. They complemented each other. She brought to him a sense of fun and gaiety and levity. He brought to her a sense of purpose and a cosmopolitan element, because he was from another country, a little bit of an exotic country in a way.
Kut and Ruby were to marry in 1942 and have 3 children, a son Hugh and twin girls Vera and Murray, who still lives in West Sussex at Felpham, within a few miles of Tangmere, the airfield from which her father flew with such bravery.
How would you describe him?
A brave, Czech, ruthless pilot who underneath somewhere must have had a heart of gold, but bravery beyond belief.
To me, he was a hero. That's, that's my image of him. I sort of, if I say worshipped him, that's perhaps too strong. But I thought he was just wonderful.
How would you describe your mother?
My mother, very warm, very cuddly, very loving, very naughty, mischievous and full of fun.
She was a lovely Welsh lady, sweet, kind, not a nasty word to say about anybody. I mean, sadly she died when she was just 64, but, she'd had a hard life.
Kut and Ruby wrote regularly to each other. In April, Kut was looking forward to coming home on leave.
We shall be together again for a long leave, every day, every night. Darling, I hope we'll have the same such nice holiday, if not better yet. I hope the weather will be good. I am looking forward like a little boy.
He was quite humble and private about his exploits in the war. He didn't sort of show off and shout about what he did. He just did it. He was doing it for his country and for everybody, say, here.
Kut wrote again to Ruby.
I received this afternoon your very nice letter, my own darling. This week I am a little bit late with my letter, but darling, you will always understand why. Moon is here, and I am busy.
On August 19, 2005, the family of Flight Lieutenant Karel Kuttelwasher, born in Czechoslovakia but a naturalised Briton, visited Coningsby in Cheshire. They went at the invitation of the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight to see the plane and the livery that enabled Kuttelwasher to become an air ace with the vengeful nickname Night Reaper.
You can see on this side where we put the swastika kill symbols, we decided to go for the 5th of May 1942. You see all the swastikas down the side of the cockpit there? And of course, 4th, 5th, he shot down 3, didn't he, on one night? And so if his ground crew were painting the swastika kill symbols on, you know, the next day after he'd come back from his night mission, on the 5th of May 1942, there would have been 11 swastika kill symbols on there. We could have gone for the whole lot, 'cause I think there would have been about 18 eventually, wouldn't there? I think. OK, it's going to put your right foot in that stirrup there.
In there?
Yeah, that's it. That's your step. And then you've got to climb right over and stand on the seat to get in.
His daughters, Vi and Mary, sat in a Hurricane cockpit, just as their father had done 60 years before.
This is the throttle down here, so the left hand would normally be on that.
Yes.
Flying with the right hand.
I felt that I was able to appreciate what it was like for him. It was so small, he was so crunched up, and the view from the cockpit was very limited.
What they went through in the war must have been horrendous. Going into those night intruder missions over France, you'd be gone for 4 hours, you were alone. So brave, I just can't imagine it.
Squadron leader Clive Rowley, a veteran of the Gulf War, runs the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight based at Coningsby.
The skills required to fly this generation of aeroplane is greater than the handling skills required to fly modern fast jets. And modern fast jets are easy to fly, but harder to operate. There's a lot going on in the cockpit, a lot of information, it's computer game stuff. These aeroplanes require greater hand-eye skills. I've had many veteran fighter pilots from the war who have said to me, I actually preferred flying the Hurricane because I was a bit ham-fisted for the Spitfire. There's far more to it than the flying skills, though, for a man like Karel Kuttelwasher. He needed to be very determined, quite resourceful. He seemed to have a knack for working out where was the best place to go. He did get himself inside the mind of the enemy, and if he went to an airfield was happening, he went and found another one. He went looking for trouble.
Wartime Britain in 1942 was starved of success. Kut became a media star.
We'd been at war for 3 or so years. The British public was war-weary. Victory was still far from secure. And so these individual fighter pilots were a bit like the footballers of today in a way. They were the heroes who were kicking back at the enemy in a one-on-one combat. His strike record was phenomenal. In the space of 3 months, he shot down 15 German bombers and claimed another 5 as damaged.
15 kills at night. Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? It is absolutely amazing. And the only one who got close was his squadron commander, one-armed Mac, who was doing it without the benefit of a left arm shot off at the elbow whilst flying fighters in Malta. Many of the others on the squadron only got like 1 kill in the same 3-month period, and some none at all.
Indeed, on one night, he actually shot down 3 Heinkel bombers in the space of 4 minutes. He was unquestionably the RAF's greatest night intruder pilot.
The remarkable thing is that he had long enough to do it, and that he was quick enough to do it. He shot down one, the Germans didn't seem to notice. Within a minute or so he was behind another, shooting that one down. They still didn't seem to notice, so he got a third. And then they sure as hell did notice, and by all accounts the lights went out, and to quote him, it was like flying through hell. All the flak came up, and he took some damage in the aeroplane getting out of there. But he still didn't go straight home. He went wandering around France with the rest of his ammunition and the rest of his fuel, seeing if he could find any steam trains to shoot up or E-boats to get on the way home. Yeah, he wasn't going to give up easily, that man.
Away from his family for too long, Kut would occasionally break the rules and fly over his home. On August 2nd, he wrote to Ruby, who was by now pregnant,
I would like to be home to care of you, but as you know, at the same time I must be on duty. And as you saw today and yesterday, I have a beautiful plane, don't you think? Did you see me?
With 15 kills to his credit, Kut was withdrawn from the front line. He went to Hollywood.
His exploits were turned into a comic strip.
There go the field lights. They should be here soon. 6 Henkels. What a target. That's 2 I've got. Time for 1 more before they get away. 3 of them down. I better start back before I run out of gas.
He didn't seek this sort of publicity. In some ways it made him feel rather uncomfortable, but he knew it was important to raise morale, and so in the last 6 months of 1943, Kuttelwasher was sent to try and encourage Czechs in North America to volunteer to fight in Czech squadrons as part of the Royal Air Force.
Of course, he was very much a star.
Oh, yes, yes. I mean, he dined with Errol Flynn and had a bevy of beauties following him wherever he went, which I don't think went down too well at home. Maybe that's half the reason how things ended.
Because he was being feted, obviously women were all over him, you know. And,
Well, he was a star.
well, exactly, and he had women writing to him, and I think she, rightly or wrongly, resented that, and that was just one of the many things that drove them apart.
I think a lot of wartime marriages wouldn't have happened in other circumstances. War brought people together who wouldn't otherwise have met each other. It put a lot of pressure on them to either forget each other or to make a partnership. They chose to marry. Their temperaments and backgrounds were very different. And once the war was over and the whole context changed, particularly when they went back to Czechoslovakia, which was a completely different lifestyle, they found sadly that they really weren't suited to one another.
They tried to live in a war-torn communist Czechoslovakia. It didn't suit either Kut or Ruby. Back in Britain, there were more rows and the family split up. Kut joined British European Airways, flying for them as a pilot for 13 years. His 2 daughters saw him only rarely. But V, now aged 12, was curious.
Why did you set out to find him?
Because the breakup of my parents' marriage meant that there was a lot of animosity, and we weren't really encouraged to see my father. But as I grew older, there was a sort of yearning to sort of see him. I'm sorry, I get emotional.
Yearning?
Yes, yes. And so I made contact with my grandmother, who I used to see fairly regularly, and she lived fairly close to him. And through her, I arranged to see him 2 or 3 times and used to go and stay with him.
Did your mother mind that?
She didn't know about it. She didn't know about it. My grandmother knew I was making contact with him, so bless her heart, she was in on the plot, as it were. But it's something I had to do.
In 1959, at the age of 42, Karel Kuttelwasher had a heart attack and died.
I'd been out in the evening, I was only young, and we came home and there'd been an announcement on the news, on the radio, and somebody had rung up to say Karel Kuttelwasher was dead. My sister cried her eyes out, and I sort of shrugged my shoulders, I believe. That's how it was, but...
Why was that?
I don't know. I don't know, maybe I was a bit harder or something, I really don't know.
To me it was devastating, and what made it even worse was, obviously my stepfather wasn't bothered. My mother was, you know, didn't care, as it were, and my sister hadn't seen him for a long time, so she wasn't that bothered. But I was devastated, and I know I was crying ever such a lot, and they couldn't understand why. And I think that the reason why I get upset even now, is because I wasn't allowed to grieve.
Years later, when V had married Roger, Ruby revealed that she had kept all the mementos from her relationship and marriage to Kuttelwasher. She'd kept them in a little red trunk.
By this time, our mother had remarried, so it was really quite a delicate subject, but she pulled out this red trunk and opened it, and it was like an Aladdin's cave. I never realised how famous he was, how, what a brave man he was. I think our mother obviously always carried a torch for him because she wouldn't have kept all these things for all this time and be so proud to show us and show Roger as well.
Strong woman?
Yes, yes, very strong. Perhaps a feminist, ahead of her time, didn't believe that a woman's place was at the kitchen sink.
Kut's turbulent marriage to Ruby lasted 9 years, 4 years during the war, only 5 years after it.
At the time they were flying, somebody like Kut would forget everything except the enemy aircraft in front of them.
There is no place for emotion in a fighter cockpit. You need to think calmly and coolly, and you don't want your judgment clouded by domestic or family issues. You need to be totally concentrated on the task in hand. So I think this business of having somebody waiting for you is almost a bad thing rather than a good thing.
I think it gave Kut a sense of family, a sense of belonging, to know that there was somebody who actually cared whether he came back.
Many didn't come back, of course. During World War II, 480 Czechs died fighting Nazi Germany in the uniform of the Royal Air Force.
Later, as sailors' plans to start a new life end in tragedy, Catherine Cookson's A Dinner of Herbs is at 3. Staying with history's greatest conflict next, though, find out how Britain cracked Enigma in Secrets of World War II.